Hi, welcome everybody. So we were thinking we're going to do some introductions of our Hillsboro School District Board, but I also wanted to just give a brief overview of the purpose of our meeting today. So at the Hillsboro School District Board, one of our board goals has been adopted to become to guide our district in becoming an anti-racist organization. And how we're tackling that is through a lot of participation in professional development for our board, policy review, and also systemic analysis of our organization. So one of the things that we wanted to look at is our SRO program, and also assess that program in our district and how it aligns with our values and the philosophy behind that program and opportunities for improvement as our board analyzes how we want to proceed with this program. So this meeting is really to have a conversation with our partners and the city and to look at the options that we have and want to present and have a conversation around that. So with that, I want to introduce our board. And maybe I'm looking at my screen and seeing who I see first, but let's go and have Jackie, Mark, and Martin.
Jackie Spross, nice to see you all. Thank you for including us in this conversation.
Mark Watson, Hillsboro School Board, Century Feeder System. I live in Aloha. And yes, thanks for being a partner in this project and taken time to chat with us.
Martin Granum, very good to be here tonight.
Next, we'll go with Sheehan and Yadira and Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sheehan Kim, Hillsboro School Board member, and want to thank Mayor Calloway and the Hillsboro City Council for having us join this work session. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Miguel Martinez. Thanks for being here.
Hello, everybody. Lisa Allen, proud member of the Hillsboro School Board, and I am so excited to get to see so many friendly faces on the screen. I missed seeing everyone in real life, so good evening.
Thank you, Lisa. And last but certainly not least, we have our student representatives to the board, Maya and Declan. Maya, do you want to unmute yourself? There you go.
Oh, hi everyone. My name is Maya.
All right. Hi everybody. My name is Devlin Mill. I'm one of the student board representatives from Liberty High School. It's great to be here, and I would like to thank everybody for the opportunity to sit on this meeting with you guys.
Thank you, Devlin. And I'll hand it back to you, Mayor, if you want to introduce our council.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, it's just great to see so many partners and good friends on the screen tonight. And so we'll go ahead and start introducing ourselves, and we'll have Finance Committee go first, and then if we'll have Transportation Committee introduce themselves. That's a good 3-and-3 way to go. So
who do you want to start with? You want to start with me?
We'll start with you, Mr. Chair.
Fred Nartigal. I'm the current chairman of the Finance Committee and president of the council, and a lame duck. My term is over on 31st of December.
Go ahead, Olivia.
Olivia Alcare, City Councilor.
Thank you. My name's Kyle Allen. I'm the lesser half of the Allen clan, as you're familiar.
Hello, my name is Anthony Martin. I'm chair of the Transportation Committee for now, and I'll pass it over to Councilor Pace.
Hi, my name is Beach Pace. I have no affiliation with the Allens, and good to see everybody tonight. Rick?
Councilor Van Beveren.
Oh, Councilor Rick Van Beveren. I'm always last, so.
So you'd think you'd be a little bit more prepared. Okay, and then, hey, Steve Calloway, Hillsboro Mayor, and I want to say I am proud to be HSD. And so, you know, again, a long time coming, our meeting tonight. And so thank you all. Thanks for your patience as we get started a bit late. With that, I will turn it over. You know, we did not have our superintendent or city manager introduce themselves, but, you know, I'll invite you two to do that as well, and then take it from there.
Sounds good. Mayor Robbie Hammond, I work as the city manager for the city of Hillsboro.
Mike Scott, superintendent for the district. And as our staff participates tonight, we will introduce ourselves at that point.
And if I could add one thing, just kind of as a parameter for tonight, you know, we are really looking at the 30,000 foot level. You know, we're not getting, you know, down into the operational component of things, because as board and council, we deal with policy. And so that's really how we're listening to the reports tonight. And, you know, in our comments and questions will or should reflect that as well.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Calloway. And I would just echo to everybody, again, thanks for joining us in this meeting. And I just want to give a shout out to Hillsboro School District. As a father of 3 kids in the school district, I just appreciate everything you all do, especially during the pandemic. It's tough, and we recognize that, and just really appreciate you all. We appreciate our partnership that we have between the city and the school district. So, operator, if we can go ahead and begin the first PowerPoint. And we can go ahead and proceed to the next slide when you're ready. So by way of agenda tonight, we're going to kind of divide this into 2 areas. We're going to talk about, from the city of Hillsboro perspective, some of the efforts that we've been undergoing over the past several months since this summer in trying to assess our policing and finding out what we're doing and how we're doing. And so I'm going to go through some of the community engagement regarding policing in Hillsboro. We'll talk about changes and updates that we have made and are currently making. And then Chief Coleman is with us as well tonight, and he will be able to talk about specific efforts that the Hillsboro Police Department has been making as well. And then after that, we'll turn it over to Mike Scott in the school district to take it from there. Next slide. So some of this information I know the City Council has seen, but I wanted to bring the school board up to speed on some of these efforts. So again, back in early summer, essentially with the murder of George Floyd, we began some efforts to listen to some of the things that were out in the community, try to get an understanding of what was being said, and trying to figure out how we as a city and also as a police department are responding. We provided multiple opportunities for that input. We used our City Views newsletter. We used city council meetings, direct mail and newsletters, social media, and press releases. And then we also had 2 facilitated listening sessions, one in English and another in Spanish, in an attempt to try to get more people to give us more comments as well. In the end, we received over 200 comments. We were able to analyze those comments. We did break them into different trend groups, and we shared that with the City Council at the August 18th work session. And I would add that the minutes and the video and the presentation for that work session are online on our website if anybody is interested. Next slide. So internally, along with all of the public engagement that we were trying to achieve, we also created an internal work group on public safety that was made a kind of a cross-departmental team that was able to provide support to this effort and also support to our police department as we were asking a lot of questions. One of the efforts that we also undertook is updating our website. And if you go to our website, there's a significant amount of information in an attempt to really be as transparent as we can be with the data that we have. And we created a new police review and advancement website, which is pictured here, that details all of the efforts that we've been undergoing over these past several months and what our next steps are. And I would encourage anybody that hasn't been to that website to go take a look. There's a lot of really great information there. Our next step is actually 2 weeks from tonight. We're having a work session with the City Council. In the last work session, we received direction that we should look into different ways to engage with our community and also different police oversight options. And so we've put some thought and effort into researching the best ways to do that. We'll be presenting to the council on December 1st to explain what we found and provide some recommendations at that point as well. So that's kind of our next step. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Chief Jim Coleman to talk specifically about the police department.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm assuming my audio is okay because I kind of audio bombed the end of the council meeting. So, okay, I'm assuming that's a thumbs up. Good evening, members of the City Council and School Board. I'm joined tonight by Police Commander Scott Hewitson, who has oversight ultimately of our school resource officers through the investigations division. I've shared developments within the police department with council members on 2 previous occasions in the last 6 months, and I hope to quickly update them and brief both bodies on where a large portion of our energies are currently focused in the police department. While these efforts are certainly influenced by the national conversation on policing, including policing in schools, many have been underway since the beginning of the year as a result of our change in police administrations. As an example, the department identified recommitment to community engagement as a major focal point at the start of 2020 and put the structures in place to accomplish this in the springtime. The Community Outreach Division was created to put our longstanding community enhancement efforts on the same level of importance as our patrol and investigations divisions. By the way, Commander Hewitson also commands the Community Outreach Division. We also shifted personnel to the division to increase capacity and efficiency. Part of that capacity is represented by 2 full-time employees, one of them being a police officer, working as a liaison team between the department, minority-owned small businesses, organizations for the underprivileged and underrepresented, and in direct dialogue with communities where a better rapport can be established. Another structural change in combination with the previously mentioned one is putting our patrol and training functions under the same command in the police department. This is intended to streamline the manner in which our specific approach to community-based policing is incorporated into the practices of our most outward-facing function, which is the patrol officer. Our crisis intervention and homeless team has been at the forefront of helping cities support homeless and housing insecure individuals through the threat of the pandemic, the downturn of the economy, and the onset of winter weather. The team of 2 officers and a police lieutenant is being augmented by the addition of our first full-time officer and clinician patrol car. This will be done through the framework of the Washington County Mental Health Response Team and is a bolster of that team, which not only helps Hillsboro, but helps the whole county. All of our personnel will be going through citywide training on implicit bias. That training will be supplemented by specific training in the police department on fair and impartial policing. The fair and impartial policing training includes elements of community involvement, including partnered training sessions with community members and police employees. I would add that bias and de-escalation training have long been woven into the structured training that is routinely delivered to the employees of the police department as we maintain their technical skills and help inform their decision making. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. Finally, we've adopted a new mission and value statement designed to consolidate all of the numerous functions and concerns of our work into 4 core elements. They are dignity, respect, service, and just outcomes. Each value is accompanied by a description of how it's manifested in practice and the positive effect it has on building trust and legitimacy. For example, our unique core value of just outcomes is defined in part by the statement that we encourage our employees to apply creative and asymmetric approaches to working with the community to solve problems. The courage to voice concern, empathy, compassion, and positivity are desirable characteristics in a law enforcement professional. Next slide, please. The School Resource Officer Program was focused on just outcomes for students, families, and educators long before we adopted that term. It may sound counterintuitive to hear that police in schools reduces physical arrests and youth referrals to the juvenile justice system. However, focusing on outcomes has that very effect. The program, those that work in it, and those that work with it have many times been the literal example of what we've tried to capture in the words just outcomes. Police officers assigned to the schools are provided the time and structure to engage in meaningful follow-through and long-term involvement, such as mentorship, counseling, and placement in diversion programs. These are all components of procedural justice. There are things of great value that have been derived from the School Resource Officer Program. Victims that never were, exclusions from the learning environment that didn't take place, and even tragedies that never transpired because of it. It doesn't stop all bad things from happening. It isn't impervious to human error, shortcomings in judgment, or traits of character. However, it's always worked in Hillsboro because it's truly collaborative between the city and the district. Even now, those who know it best are working together to capture an evolution of it that builds upon trust already won and creates pathways to trust where it hasn't yet existed. Thank you all, both council and board members, for the opportunity to share a few, hopefully quick thoughts with you. I certainly appreciate, and the whole police department appreciates, your careful consideration as we move forward. Thank you, Robbie.
Thanks, Chief. And with that, Mike, we'll turn it over to you all.
All right, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity. So let me just kick us off here. And if we can go ahead and put up the second presentation, that'd be great. I'm going to start, and then we'll invite Morgan Quimby. She will be finishing up the presentation. And while we're waiting for that slide to come up, I'd just like to thank both Morgan and Alex O. They've put in a tremendous amount of work into this process and really helping us to understand not only what makes a quality SRO program, but also where as a community we stand on this. So just to let you know, we have been pursuing really two different avenues as we've moved through this very deliberate and comprehensive process over the last several months. And those two avenues find us exploring two different things. One of those being, what can we do to better understand what changes are necessary to have just the most quality SRO program and relationship with law enforcement that we possibly can. And to that end, we've gathered a lot of information that we're going to share with you. And we've worked to put that into a draft memorandum of understanding that we can start a conversation with law enforcement, as well as the city of Hillsboro, as well as Washington County. So that is one avenue that we're taking, is trying to capture all of those areas of concern, put those in a memorandum of understanding, and then address those and have avenues to address all of those concerns. So that's one avenue we're taking. And then the second avenue is really just a broader conversation about what does our relationship with law enforcement look like? And does the current model work for the students that we serve? So that's a broader conversation that's also going on. We've been having that conversation, as well as the MOU avenue as well. If you'd go ahead and advance the slide one, that would be great. All right. During my time in the Hillsboro School Districts, we've had several iterations of what Hillsboro School District's relationship with the school resource officers looks like. What does the relationship with the city look like? What's the relationship with the county look like? And just during my short time in the Hillsboro School District, we've seen the relationship and the roles and responsibilities that SROs have in our school district change over a number of times. We probably all remember the DARE t-shirts that officers used to hand out, and the program that the DARE program that they used to do. Following that, we had the GREAT program, and that was during a time in Hillsboro where we were focused on gang resistance. And so that was that program. We entered a time where it was all about relationship building. And then we've entered a time as schools became targets for violence. It really was about how do we harden the target, and how do we make schools less accessible to people that are wanting to promote or conduct violence of any type. So we've been through a variety of different iterations. As we dealt with the murder of George Floyd and we saw the racial and social unrest and this incredible movement that transpired after that, it became very clear that we needed to reevaluate our relationship with SROs and make sure that we were doing the best that we possibly could to meet the needs of our students. So we've done a variety of different things. That has included some surveys that we've put out. We've put out 2 different sets of surveys. We weren't happy with the first set and the number of participants that we had, so we sent that out again and received a lot more feedback this time around. We've also we've received feedback from some of our parent advocacy committees and our advisory committees, and so we've received feedback that way. And we've done some vetting of the draft MOU in order to get some feedback. So here's what we've learned as we've talked to our community. There's need for these 4 things that you see on the screen. There's a need for clarity as to what the roles and responsibilities and what does that relationship look like between our law enforcement and the school district. So there needs to be clarity on that. There needs to be transparency. And when we talk about transparency, really what we're getting out there is how do SROs spend their time? When is it that the district requests their presence? And so what does that look like? And we've found as we've gone through this process that there are many things that the Hillsboro School District has to own in this process. And that is, one of the main ones is consistency. What does those roles and responsibilities look like from school to school? Our officers use the same ways from school to school? And does our administrative team have a thorough understanding of the appropriate use of school resource officers? And then finally, of course, over and over again, we have people sharing that they're most interested in having positive relationships with the school resource officers and our students. That's a reoccurring theme. All right, if you'd advance one more slide. We've also, we've been doing some homework and gathering some additional information as well. Morgan and Alex have been working with Georgetown University, and they've got resources that have been made available and some consultation that's been taking place for our district to gain a thorough understanding of what a top-notch SRO program looks like. We've also dug into what are the recommendations from the National Association of School Resource Officers, and you can see the bullet points here. And what we're going to do here is, I won't read these bullet points to you, but you can see that relationships, the selection process, large emphasis on non-law enforcement, and that would help with relationship building. And Chief Coleman talked a little bit about this, some of that specialized training that would benefit SROs, and making sure that that training also includes implicit bias and racism training. So that we can continue to combat that and to fulfill our mission of becoming an anti-racist school district. So I'm going to turn this over to Morgan at this point, and Morgan is going to share with you how we believe that we can not only meet the concerns that have been raised, but we can also work in the recommendations from the National Association of SROs into an MOU that would allow us to move forward and really fulfill that next iteration of what we would want the relationship to look like between law enforcement and the Hillsboro School District. All right, Morgan.
Thank you. So my name is Morgan Quimby, and I'm at TOSA with the Hillsboro School District. And thank you for letting me be here today. What we learned, and what I just want to re-emphasize that Mike had mentioned, is that first slide is really about the feedback we got from our parent committees, from our staff, from our students about what they need and what they're seeking, and then how we are folding that into what the National Association of SROs is saying is best practices when creating an SRO program. Yeah, teacher on special assignment, thank you. And what I want to make sure before we go on to the slides where we give some examples of what we've asked for in the MOU is that we really are aware that this is a partnership, and making sure that we know that that we don't want this MOU to be a Hillsboro School District just saying this is what we want law enforcement to do, but instead this is what we want to do as a partnership between law enforcement and Hillsboro School District. And so how are we going to do that together? What are our roles and responsibilities together to ensure that we are partnering to best serve our community in schools and out of schools? If you go to the next slide, I actually think you're going to skip ahead one more. There we go. Oh, back, sorry. There we go. So clarity. So as we mentioned, we really, a lot of our parents and our students were asking for clarity around what does the SRO do? What's the purpose of the program? What's the intent of the program? And as Mike shared and all of us are aware, we've had a lot of different versions of an SRO program throughout the years and the goals. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had clear goals for the program and not just for each of us individually within it, but as a whole. And so one of the 3 goals is actually that fostering that positive school climate based on respect for all students and community members. We want to make sure that everybody knows each other by name, strength, and need. And that is a core value of the Hillsboro School District, is to ensure that we know our students, our families, and all stakeholders that we support and we interact with by name, by strength, and by need. And so that we are able to provide those supports to each other and to the people that we care for. We want to make sure that our SRO program educates our students, staff, and families on relevant law enforcement topics. So there are a variety of topics that there's different requirements that we have to review, like Aaron's Law, Addie's Act, so suicide prevention, consent education. And we want to make sure that we can partner with our law enforcement officers that are in schools to do some of that education, but also really how do we take the information that we're delivering to students and make sure that we share that with parents. And so that would be something we would look to law enforcement to support, is you have the knowledge, you have the skills, they have the training. How do we make sure that our families are hearing the information that they need and we have a consistent message between each organization? And then strengthening the community relationships by creating a safe school environment. And so we know that that is a primary goal of law enforcement. We want to make sure we stick to that. We also want to be creative on how do we support that. So how do we make sure, as was mentioned earlier, Hillsboro School District wants to be an anti-racist organization. So how do we ensure that we are physically, emotionally, and socially protected within this safe school environment as partners with law enforcement? So again, it's that partnership piece and connecting and coordinating efforts to ensure that we're meeting our goals for all stakeholders in a collaborative process and way. Next slide, please. Transparency is another thing, and this is transparency around what's the role like, what do our law enforcement partners do during the day, but also what is our role as far as a school district to provide supports to ensure that our law enforcement partners understand what we're doing and how we can support each other. One of the pieces is making sure that we're involved in that process of selecting the SRO. We do know that we do not get final say in who's going to be placed. That would obviously be law enforcement's final say. I don't think that this is something that's new or unique to the system we already have. I believe a lot of times we already have a member of our staff, a member of our community on that hiring process. And so this would just be putting that in formal writing, that we would have some way to be involved and stay connected, so that we ensure that the people that are serving in our buildings are connected to the goals that we have set as a school district and that 5-year strategic plan and where we're moving as a community. We also are asking that if there's a possibility of having SROs that have college experience, so college degree or college coursework. And the reason for that, even though that's different than what law enforcement has as a standard to become a police officer, the reason is that we're a K-12 institution, and we find it very important that anybody that's employed in our school district or that works with our kids and volunteers can speak to their experience of how did you figure out your career path? What was your options? What was that process of looking at colleges? How did you figure out your financial aid and things like that? So having that communication and that partnership with students to build those relationships and think long-term about life opportunities. We want to make sure that we have data for accountability and improvement. So one of the asks is that we would have SROs would submit monthly reports of what they do. So not the formalized report, but a general like data of we spent about this many hours this week doing classroom presentations. We spent about this many hours a week in our attendance meetings and safety meetings. So that's that transparency piece for our parents and for our community, so that they know what the day in the life of the SRO is like. But also for us, that if we have our goals and we know what we want our SRO program to do, is there time in the day to do that? If we're seeing that SROs are responding to drug and alcohol events 25% of the time, which is not a thing, but if that was, then what could we do as a district to prevent that? What curriculum could we put in place? What partnerships could we have in the community? How could we support each other to prevent the drug and alcohol issues before the SROs have to respond? So it's accountability for both sides of that partnership to ensure that we're meeting our goals together to support our community together. Next slide, please. Then there's that consistency. As Mike mentioned, it's important that we have a consistent view of what an SRO does. So if they're at our middle schools, all of our parents in middle schools know what an SRO does no matter what building they're in. And then as those parents go with their kids right to high school, they know the difference between like, okay, this is what SRO is like in a middle school, and then this is what they also do at the high school. So that continuum of support, that relationship and trust, and again, that transparency of we get it, we know what's happening. We also want to make sure that we make it clear and support SROs and that desire to not be involved in school discipline. So as Mike mentioned, we did get feedback and have presented in a variety of different ways some of the ideas we've had around our MRU. And what we've heard is that SROs don't want to be involved in school discipline, and we don't want them involved in school discipline. So making sure we have that spelled out, and then we train our staff to know that. And so we wouldn't involve our SROs on anything that isn't a criminal matter as far as discipline, behavior related. We also want to make sure that there is some annual training requirements. We know that they are already getting a lot of training. A lot of that was mentioned earlier in the presentation, and so we appreciate hearing that. But making sure that we just spell out that we would like SROs to take a nationally recognized training class or program or working in a juvenile area, so working in a school setting. We know the National Association of SROs has several different levels of content. I believe HPD actually already provides this to their police officers that are in the SRO role, and so it would be continuing that. Also making sure that our district is providing training and supporting SROs. So ensuring that our SROs are very familiar with the systems, support, structures, rules, and identity of our schools and of our district. And so really spelling out in our MOU what we are as a Hillsboro School District responsible for providing to our SROs to support the goals. One slide, please. And then that positive relationship, and I heard that mentioned by PD earlier, and also, again, obviously that's important to us to make sure that we have that positive relationship. And part of that is emphasizing the non-law enforcement role. So one of the things that we're asking is if there's a possibility that our SROs wear a different type of uniform. So we still want them to meet their HPD and Washington County standards. We want to make sure that they're protected and that they're safe. But could they wear a polo shirt like some of their summer, or I don't know what we call it, like business casual uniforms that we see them in at times? So they still have all of their gear. They still are identifiable, but that way we know that who they are and why they're there. That was another ask of our parents too when we were getting feedback. Its parents don't know when a patrol officer is at a school or when it's an SRO, partly because of the uniform. And so if there was a way to delineate or to be able to, as a parent, I show up and I know that uniform means SRO, this uniform means patrol officer, that helps me as a parent identify who I can seek out to ask questions about the school system or about the school environment. And that person will have some sort of connection and knowledge versus a patrol officer that may not, right? We also talked about a possible name change. We know that our HPD officers are youth service detectives. So is there any way to lean into that youth service name so that we can really remind people that the whole point of that school resource officer program is to serve youth and to support youth. And so really leaning into that name. And then being mindful and very intentional about how we integrate our police officers and our SROs into the community. So at times our SROs can be like guest speakers or can just kind of, they come and play games, but people don't always think of them as part of our school building or our district. We want to change that. We want to make sure that they feel part of our community, that they feel connected, that they are they're invited to our staff meetings, to our celebrations, to our activities, because we want to make sure that this is a strong partnership and is not just a service that's provided, but really working together to create that integration. I believe that is the last slide. There's a lot more to this. We really wanted to make sure that anything that we put in place or anything that we asked for through the MOU was responsive to what we heard from our parents, from our community members, and from our law enforcement partners to ensure that everybody's needs are met, that everybody's asks are getting met and that we're prioritizing kids first. Again, we know that that's what's the intention with our SROs. We know that that's what our goal is for all of us. We're here for students. So just making sure that we focus on that when we're making decisions, and that we're creating transparency for our community, and that our families know what to expect, how to expect it, and how they're going to get communicated to if there's ever an opportunity or time to do that. And that's the end of my presentation.
I think, Mayor, we are ready for the discussion portion of the agenda on this.
That is, excuse me, correct. So, at this point, we'll just kind of throw it out to hear your thoughts, both as board members as well as counselors. Just, first take, first blush, questions. If you have questions for either Morgan or police, just go ahead and with all the faces on the screen, it's a little hard. So Erica and I will kind of watch to see hands that go up, and we'll go ahead and call.
See Kyle.
I see Kyle.
Thank
I
you.
just want to make sure that Lisa's hand isn't up too. All right, go ahead, Kyle.
So I have a quick question. I've had the benefit during COVID times of being able to go and watch a lot of the school board meetings. So a lot of what was just presented was in their last meeting, which is excellent. I'm curious, has our staff reviewed all of those points that were just presented to us? And do they take any issues with what was just presented, or does this seem agreeable?
I can answer that, Kyle. What we did is we met with law enforcement last week, and we shared a draft of the MOU with law enforcement. We wanted to make sure that they had the opportunity to react to some of the details that are in there. So they currently have the MOU, and they will, and then we're scheduling a follow-up meeting either this week or next week. I'm not sure where it's scheduled just yet, but we do have a follow-up meeting. And so we'll be able to hear any specifics. In terms of the broader scope and the values around it, there has not been an issue at all. But we also wanted to share the specifics, get some reactions to that, and then we will share that with our board as well.
Chief Coleman, did you want to, I was just going to see if Chief wanted to maybe just add anything from police perspective on that too.
Yeah, thank you. And I would agree with the superintendent. Part of the reason that Commander Hewitson here is with me, he's been involved, and the school district's been really helpful in not just drafting something alone and then presenting it to us. They've had our employees involved in it, try and make good decisions. And I would agree with him that the broad philosophies and concepts we're in agreement with, and it's just the technicalities of how certain things would be pulled off, frankly, that we just would need to work through. But just as a for instance, we were very open-minded about uniforms. There's certain ORS standards and safety standards we have to meet, but there's by no means any inflexibility on discussions like that.
I saw Olivia's hand before.
Yeah, I appreciate definitely what the police department has done as far as making changes and responding, and what you've described tonight with what Hillsboro School District has been doing and considering. And I'm going to jump from the 30,000 foot down to the day when the students came to our plaza and explained what they felt. And I would like to hear, because I've heard everything here tonight supporting why we should have the SROs and what sort of things that you're considering and ways of preparing them and how they can interact with our school. And I want to be mindful of the fact that there's a lot of people in the community who don't trust the police. They simply don't trust the police. So for the small business, we're figuring out a plan of how to engage. And I believe why we're here tonight is to figure out how we can work as partners on making a school experience for students better with the presence of police officers in the school. I'm a principal. I've had to call the cops because a student brought a weapon to school or they had drugs that they brought to school. So I've had to do that. But I've also had an opportunity to really think about, do I make the choice to call the cops, or do I make a choice to put the student on the course of getting some mental health services, if that's what they need, or start engaging with social workers? And so I appreciate the SROs and getting training, but that's not what they are. And if somebody goes and gets a social work bachelor's degree and wants to apply at Hillsboro School District, they would have some professional background and training in knowing and understanding theories and philosophy about why they would engage with students in the way they would do it. And so I appreciate hearing what it is that you're considering, but I really want to examine what the role of the school resource officer is. The HSD has career pathway development with counselors, teachers, career counselor is there. I can see that the SRO can give some input in kind of talking about what their pathway was, what their shared experience was, especially if they share the same background, ethnicity. But again, is that their role of what they should be doing? And you don't have to answer this tonight. I'm just sharing what it is that's on my mind about this. And, changing their uniforms could be a way to do that, but they're still cops. And I think I'd like to hear more, because even if we did surveys, right? We had people come to our work sessions. People who came to the Spanish-speaking work session were apprehensive about speaking up at all. So I'd like to know in depth, like if we're going to do this, what do families feel? What do the families who aren't convinced that SRO should be in the schools, whose children, they don't want their children to be normalized around the presence of police officers, for example. So I'd like to, hopefully, we get to explore those options of how an SRO presence could be beneficial in the school to all families. Thanks.
That has been our goal as we've gathered information, is to better understand the various feelings that are out there around SROs and their presence in the school. That has been what this information gathering has been all about. We were not planning on getting into the specifics of the MOU this evening, but I can tell you that when it comes to addressing the concerns that the families have raised, you will see when the time is appropriate, and we have it more in a final draft type form after our school board has had a chance to look at it, after law enforcement has a chance to look at it, you will see that the areas of concern are addressed in pretty specific ways. So, for example, the types of training, making sure that they understand a young adolescent development and make sure they understand about cultural bias and just a myriad of other things. Those will be addressed in there, and that has been our entire goal, is to understand the concerns and then to address those.
And I just wanted to add also to Olivia's concern, one of the things that we had to own from our side in our district is that exactly what you just talked about what is the role of administrators and how they decide when to call or when not to call, when to engage them, and how they will participate in our district. And that's something that we are looking internally ourselves to do. Just as we're asking the training, we're doing a lot of training of our own staff around biases. We're doing a lot of training, also wanting to clarify what is the role and making sure that any new administrator, existing administrators, that there's there's definitely that's clarified, and that's around that clarity piece. Is that a lot of times what we heard back when we had some administrators is we have this is how they work in our building, but it wasn't consistent in how they were utilized in another building. And so a lot of that conversation is really on us as a district and on how we train our employees and what we are allowing them to utilize the SROs for. So that's part of this, is making sure that we have that explicitly mentioned. We don't want to contribute to what we already know is a disproportionate impact on our students of color. But that's something that we have to own ourselves to at our district. So again, this is definitely something that we're continuing to analyze, and I think historically, we haven't really looked at how the program is working or evaluated, and that's part of that transparency and accountability, is actually looking at it every year, looking at our data, and not only just not only just the data that is quantitative, that we see those discipline rates, but also our qualitative data, hearing from our communities, specifically our communities of color, and having focused conversations with them, and looking at our program and seeing how it's working on an annual basis, so that it's not just one thing that we talk about it now and then forget about it, but that we're actually looking at every year.
Thanks, Erica. We co-own that responsibility because the students who came and talked to us explained what their experience was like in the school district as well as in the city. So that's a shared thing that we have to overcome. Thanks.
For sure. One thing that we talked to Steve is how at the end of the day, both of us serve the same community. It's the same people that are in our district that are in our city. I see Kyle hand is up.
Exactly.
I see Lisa's hand up first.
Yeah, and this is just to address. Oh, go ahead.
We're going to say Director Allen.
Thank you. I'm happy to go first. I just wanted to share a few thoughts. Thank you very much, Councilor Allen, for letting me go first. So just a couple things. First, I appreciate that we're trying to make this be collaborative, because I think that we've both been hearing from the community that they want us to address this issue. So I think this is a great step for us to be together and kind of talk about some of the details. And I really appreciate the work that Morgan has done to kind of hammer out what the feedback means. I would say, you know, we did two pretty thorough surveys with our community, and the last one that Superintendent Scott spoke about, because we didn't get enough survey responses the first time. We had 2,300 responses to the second survey, which is a significant amount of the secondary school population that we serve in the Hillsboro School District. And overwhelmingly, if you look at that data, parents and students are supportive of the SRO program, which was data that is different than what I personally was expecting. I think part of that is because a lot of the parents are elder millennials like me, and we remember, you know, the year we were at high school, Columbine happening, right? We remember that, and that's the age that we were raised in, and now we're raising our children in this world, and so that school safety is of paramount importance to us, and I think that's a lot of parent support, but also the student support too. So I also want, you know, I work in schools and as my day job as teacher, and I've met more than one student who has shared with me experiences that they have had with abuse or neglect, and the relationship that they were able to forge with their school resource officer to make it safer for them to come forward and more comfortable. I think that's really important, and it's a key piece of the SRO's job that we don't give enough attention to. So I wanted to shed a little bit of light on that. And then I also, you know, just want to say again, you know, the generation that I grew up in, we care a lot about school safety. And it wasn't that long ago in Reynolds, which is just a couple of school districts over, where school resource officers actually stopped a school shooting from happening. in 2014. And so they're, you know, it's about our students, and it's about their safety, and it's about making sure that they are able to have someone advocate for them, and identify, in addition to the classroom workers and staff, someone who's trained to identify when are they being abused, when are they being neglected. It's critical. And I think that the survey data that we received supports that strongly. And so I'm really happy that we did that survey and we have that data, because that tells us exactly what we need to. Only 13% of the respondents to that survey said that they did not want to have a school resource officer. So I think that's pretty clear what direction we should be going. Thanks.
Thank you. The next two hands I've seen were Counselor Allen and then Director Spross.
So actually, I'm going to wait. So I'll let another person speak. Thank you.
I think that's me. Olivia, thank you for bringing that up. I do think it's important that we recognize the school to prison pipeline and how, what our responsibility is with the SRO relationship to lessen that. I think that's really important. And I think that goes directly to the role of the SROs. I would be interested, and I'm going to have to go look that up, the data from the community survey. I know the data from our survey. I have to say I was a little disappointed in the number of responses we had. I wish we had had more. And I wish we had heard from members of the community that we don't normally hear from, because that's who I really want to hear from, or the people that are the quietest, I think is the best way to put that. I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, I'm curious to know more about the survey results and how we can maybe increase community response and get those stories that I think we all want to hear about.
And
thank you.
I think that's one of the things that we would also talking about is really looking, when we're talking about that reviewing of an annual, is not only hearing from people who, you know, have really great experiences and it's all good, but also from the people that haven't had so good experiences, and also from people that actually have maybe interactions with you know, our SROs, and circling back to our families and checking in with them and saying, how was it? How did everything go? And then just getting that input from them and learning from that. I see, Morgan, you had also, I see your hand, Morgan, and then I'll go to Yadira.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that in addition to the student surveys, we've also done focus groups. So we really wanted to make sure that we did hear the voices of our marginalized communities and those communities we may not have heard from in the past. So we put together several different people that had partnerships with communities and families. So we had groups that worked with our Latinx PAC and our Black Family Village PAC. And we reached out to them to get feedback from them around their perspective. So with partners that they were already close to and already had that trusting relationship with. And then we've also shared the similar slideshow with most of those groups. I'm actually presenting to the Latinx PAC tomorrow night to get more feedback and to make sure that we're responding to their needs and that we are aware of their concerns. So in addition, I just wanted to make sure we're aware that in addition to the surveys, we also have had focus groups and direct outreach and interaction. But as Erica mentioned, I think this is also part of that continuous improvement. So if we do choose to continue our partnership and continue to have the SRO program, then as we are strengthening our relationships and as we are intentional at building those relationships and ensuring that our families feel like they have a voice and know they have a voice, I believe and I hope that we will continue to get more and more feedback and that more people feel comfortable, and we won't have the same need to push in to different communities and really kind of pull out that feedback, but really creating an environment where people are ready, willing to say, hey, I got an opinion and I'm going to share it because I have a safe place and I trust you to respond to my needs. And so that's an environment we're creating, and we're hoping that as if we continue this partnership, that is something that we can do together, so that we ensure that our families all have a voice and know that they have a voice and know that we're ready to respond to their voices and their needs.
Yadira?
Hi, Chief Coleman, thank you for the updates on what the police department is doing, considering what's going on right now. But I just have, they're kind of comments, questions. What partnerships specifically with organizations that have, culturally specific organizations that have relationships with historically marginalized communities, what partnership does HPD have? And then also, so transparency and accountability is one of the main things that we heard back from parents. So is part of the changes making, for example, a citizen placing a complaint made any easier? Like how has that process been looked at, and how easily is it for citizens to give their concerns, and then also to get feedback or some type of response to their concerns?
Yeah, so our team of officers who are our team with the officer and our community enhancement team member have been out in the field for about 6 weeks. So they are developing some of those relationships, but they are, for instance, are trying to reestablish a Latino advisory committee that went dormant in the police department for several years, reestablish connections with folks that were members of that, look for new members. They're not starting from zero. There's a lot of relationships that have been built there over the years. We work closely with the Chamber of Commerce. They have a liaison to minority-owned businesses that we work pretty closely with. But part of our development of these connections is to, as I mentioned before, we have trainings coming in, we have meetings to discuss strategy, where this community and officer dual training together is where we can reach out to those organizations and start to either initiate partnerships or just really from the ground up build just a first name basis interaction with them and build small. It really is beginning as a grassroots operation. Build small and build up smart. Really, the idea is to listen to how best we could do that. One thing that we've tried to be really cognizant of is police departments in the past have really kind of decided before they struck out that this is the way it will look. And I've just asked that be inverted, and that this team and all the members of the police department, including the commander who's over community outreach, is to invert that and ask folks how best could we build it that it would work for you. Not to take too much time, but for instance, one of the initial feedback items we got is, you've got to understand that a lot of people work during the day, and a lot of people have children, and these meetings need to happen at non-traditional times if you really want to talk to members of the community that you haven't talked to before, or that have certain jobs in certain sectors. So it's very much infancy, but we're trying to build it smart. We do, at the police department, we do accept all complaints. We're ahead of the curve, particularly on bias complaints, because we exceed the state standard on how to receive bias complaints. You have to have a mechanism in place. We've created an online mechanism, and with the help from our technology folks in the city, we also allow that. One of the challenges that we didn't realize in the beginning is we like to allow people to be anonymous if they wish to be. That's very difficult online to kind of erase that electronic signature, but we worked hard with our IS people to accommodate online anonymous complaints. We do follow up when we reach conclusions on complaints with those folks that file them, but we are looking to take the next steps, and how to be more transparent about how many complaints we receive, how they're resolved, the categories they fall into. we still work in a state where officers have a Bill of Rights, so transparency is on a gradient, but those things that we can speak to and give the public some sort of idea in, if you will, our job performance, and those areas are areas we are, trying to expand into, and I really want us to kind of push the envelope where it's smart and advisable.
Thank you.
Let me go. I saw Director Branham, and then Ms. Sinapi, and then Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chair. I really appreciate this discussion at this level. I think this issue warrants sustained focus from the City Council, the Chief of Police, the Superintendent, and the Board of Directors. I think maybe it slipped off our collective radar, and I'm very glad to see that this group is really doing a deep dive on this issue. I think that's what the community wants us to do. Chief Coleman, I was really impressed with your speaking to community engagement, and I know the council and the city manager are on board, but I was particularly pleased to hear you give voice to that. The nature of the SRO program really offers you a unique level of community engagement, unlike other police encounters that are somewhat transactional or brief. The opportunity to engage with the community through the SR program is profound. SROs get to know whole families, they get to know parents, they get to know staff, really what makes them tick. And so the opportunity to engage with the community through the SRO program is really, really, really profound. For our part, HSD is able to do difficult things and do them well. And I feel like we're approaching this in the similar vein that we approached comprehensive sexuality education, which was a hot button with the community. We sought engagement. We were very transparent and inclusive in how we went about that. And we achieved an outcome that I think we're all very, very, very satisfied with. I think the SRO is kind of in the same vein, where we have to be very deliberate and very thoughtful and purposeful and really get to where we need to be on this program. Councilor Alcare, to your point, for me personally, everything is on the table. I'm wide open in terms of what collectively we decide we want to do. And I think Superintendent Scott mentioned that when he talked about, on the one hand, we're talking about what does a world-class SRO program really look like? What are the components of that? On the other hand, is it still a good fit with the Hillsboro School District? I think both of those are still in play very, very much. And just what motivates me to take a wide, fresh look at this is we have 86.24% of our students graduate on time, which in Oregon is a really good number. But on the flip side, that means that 13.8% of our students aren't graduating. And I'm always asking myself, what are we doing structurally that is maybe a barrier to those 13.8%? And it occurs to me that maybe despite everybody's best efforts, the SRO program is maybe a barrier. I don't know that. I'm not asserting that, but it's a question in the back of my mind as we undertake a really, really deep dive into that. Is there some component of the SRO program that presents as a barrier to these kids that aren't graduating? I don't know, but hopefully I can get that answered in my own mind as we go through this. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Mayor. I yield back.
Steve, could I respond to Martin just quickly? Sure. So I'm in my ward is the highest number of people of color in the city, highest percentage of Latinx immigrant communities. And these folks, and this is on us too, do not have good relationships with cops. So you heard what Chief Coleman said and the steps that he's taking, and very deliberate, and the approach he's taking. It's having a positive impact because they're working collaboratively with the small businesses. So I think this is what we have to do, is work more collaboratively with those families who were not engaging, who are fearful of the police, and the presence of police in the schools. I'm not saying to take them completely out, but I just wanted to share a little bit about who the demographics, and we're talking about Hill High and Glencoe with the highest populations, and Century of who those student populations are. So trust is very important.
Thank you, Counselor. Executive Director Sinapi, excuse me.
Oh, Mr. Calloway, he was my mentor. Good evening, everybody. Executive Director of Schools, and I'm not kidding, he was when I first started as a principal. I just wanted to speak on just a couple of things. Part of the role I've been in this year is working directly with our Executive Director of Equity, our Director of Equity, and the both of us have been working with moving our work forward in the school district and have done a lot of targeted groups. Really trying to get the voices of what we would perceive to be marginalized community members who haven't, whose voices haven't always been heard. And so we have several things that have taken place that we've been able to gather information, which includes the formation of a PAC called the Black Village, which is represented from Black, African American, and African family members. And they've actually come to the board and spoke with them recently. We also have different family engagement groups, including the Asian Pacific Islander group with Kana and I and Audrey Neville help facilitate. So on a parental level, we have had several groups that have been talking and getting the information from our parents. On a teacher level, we also have affinity groups set up for teachers of color, and we meet on a monthly basis to have that, as well as administrators of color, so that we can hear their input and their voice on SROs in the school. And then in addition, just our students, Mike and I have been met with a series of there was a series of meetings that took place that we met with high school students, students of color, and white students in our school district. And so I just wanted to address that we have, even though the reflection of the survey wasn't truly as high as we wanted, it was pretty high. And hearing those voices of our families, hearing the voices of our students, the people we directly serve, is how we were able to arrive on this clarity on the building the relationships with the SROs. That being said, I do think, like Ms. am I saying it right, Olivia? Alcar? Okay. Mentioned, it's that community engagement and that partnership. As a woman of color, but also as a person who was raised with a father who was a police officer and a mother who worked for LAPD for 38 years, I understand and I respect the police department, and I understand the role that they play. That being said, our collaboration has to be in sync with each other in order to change the narrative. The narrative for some of our students out there isn't one that's positive, exactly what Olivia was talking about. However, we have a huge opportunity to change that narrative, and it can start with our SROs. So that's just my 2 cents. I wanted to give the perspective that there have been a lot more voices that have been heard that aren't necessarily reflected in the amount of surveys we're talking about, but were collected in another manner, which was more personal and more connected. But I couldn't emphasize more that when we start looking at that, it's that community partnership and community engagement of us working together to change that narrative. Thank you, Mr. Calloway.
Thank you, ma'am. So we'll go Anthony, then Jackie, and then Chair Lopez. I think we're going to call on some of the student representatives. Okay.
Perfect. First off, I want to thank everyone for being here, both the school district board members as well as the staff, really appreciative. Also really grateful for the presentations on both the school district and the HPD side, both really great. I have a couple questions that are scattered through, so I'll kind of go through notes and stuff. One of the things that I heard, and I want to say, Martin or Commissioner Granum, are you all commissioners, chair, board? No. Director, thank you. I apologize for that. Director Granum, I appreciate you bringing up the fact that, you know, SROs as a whole are something we're trying to optimize as a program, but we're also trying to figure out, is that the best choice for schools? I think that was going to be the first place I start, where the initial point for both the school district and for and for Hillsboro was to say, hey, we have this program now, how can we make it better? Not, is this the best way to serve? I think that's kind of the first place I start with, is I think we as Hillsboro also need to figure out, what do we want to accomplish with this? You know, if I'm not mistaken, the initial SRO program was to create a positive relationship between police officers and students. There's something like that in the mission statement. Obviously, as everyone says, it's grown and changed over time. I think we need to figure out what that is. I'm going to say, for me personally, I think about it as trying to improve outcomes for students, increase livability, increase equity in our community. I also am starting from the assumption that the resources that we are providing in terms of dollars stay in our schools, so that we are still supporting our schools. And that's really important to me, because in this conversation, one of the things that has been emphasized over and over and over again about school resource officers is that you want to emphasize the non-law enforcement officer aspects of their job. Why that's important to me is because the basis of these folks right now are police officers. That shows me that there is a difference between who these people are and what we want them to do. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is in this situation. It can be in this situation, because we're saying that we want someone to fill a job that they aren't the most qualified for, or better worded, there are people who could potentially be more qualified. I think that's a really important point to start here, is that, you know, even if we go to the National Association of School Resource Officers, they have a triad of school-based policing. 2 of the 3 legs of that triad have nothing to do with law enforcement. It's education, informal counselor, you know, a teacher and an informal counselor. Well, if we're talking about 2/3 of a job potentially being things that aren't on law enforcement, I think it's really important that we have that conversation. I'm not necessarily advocating that we take all school resource officers out. I really appreciate the survey work that the school district did, because it showed that even in disaggregated data, even when looking at responses by race, it did show that there was broad support across the community for school resource officers being in schools. I really appreciate the steps we've gone forward about clarifying roles, making sure that everyone can understand. But at the root of it, what we're saying is, I've been trying to come up with a metaphor, and I know some of, I know at least Robbie, I've talked to about this. It's like trying to hammer in a screw. You know, there's a better tool for that job, but we're still using a hammer. And that's where we can get the job done, but I think we need to figure out what the best tool to accomplish our goal is. And if our goal is education and counseling, with all due respect to the school resource officers we have and the great jobs that they do, I don't know if that's the best place for those folks to be, or the best background for those folks to come from. So that's really the highest level of kind of policy thought I have on this, is that I want to try and figure out how we can best use those resources to still accomplish the same goals, to still have that same level of crime prevention, to have the same relationship with law enforcement officers, but to say that if the jobs that these folks are doing aren't consistent with their backgrounds, then we might need to choose different people. We might need to have a better tool to optimize how we're serving our community. That's really the root of what I see this. I see this as best using our public trust, our public dollars that we have, and trying to find the best possible use to achieve the best possible outcome. And in this case, I'm still skeptical that this is the best way to use our funds. So that's kind of my high level thought. I also had 2 questions for Chief Coleman. In the PowerPoint, you had said that the HSD and HPD partnership reduces arrests and referrals to the juvenile justice system and reduces response time to crimes and disturbances. And this gets back to what I had been talking about. It's a pretty clear theme in here of consistency, transparency. What data do we have to show those outcomes? I know that when we first talked about this in May, I really appreciated the police department providing the quantitative data that we had, but it was relatively sparse, especially in these types of areas. So I was hoping if you could talk about that a little bit, and then I assume respond a little bit to some of the things I would say.
Sure. I think we do track data, but we have to be very cautious of it, because we are dealing with juveniles ultimately, and there are a lot of very smart protections about how we analyze that data and how we look at the ultimate results of it. We have a very low as I said, physical arrest rate, 6 people in the last 3 years, very low for violent situations. So it's very, very rare that that happens. We do track those like we would any kind of time that we have, you know, physical interaction with somebody. The reference to response times is with school resource officers. There are multiple ways for school administrators to contact them. So they don't have to go through the traditional police dispatch system, which not only adds additional time to the call response, but also prioritizes calls. So you know, a call that maybe in the big scheme of things of everything that's happening at a moment in time in Hillsboro wouldn't be very important. We can get a school resource officer there that much more quickly. And of course, for the more serious things, we have multiple ways of getting officers. They work in teams. It's not always individuals. And the idea there is to do those things such as de-escalation and you know, interdiction before maybe a crime has occurred, or just, you know, where speed is not only a safety thing, but it can maybe keep something from becoming from going from a disturbance to a crime. I would say that you know, one thing that would be near impossible to quantify, but I think is really important to both your comments, Counselor, and then Counselor Alcare and some of the directors is, I think Counselor Alcare mentioned earlier that sometimes she's faced with a decision between, should I call the cops or not? And I think that's a really important aspect of school resource officers, is that I can't quantify how many times the school administrator has been able to call somebody they know on a first name basis and say, hey, off the record, or, you know, this is what I've got and I'm not really sure what I should do here. And I think things such as the arrest data bear out that, you know, many times, if not even, you know, I'd be careful to say more often than not, because as I said, we can't track every stat, but the decision is, you know, no, I'm here to help, but this is not a crime, or we can deal with this in a different way. We can stop this from happening, whatever the case may be. And I think that's where it's that ability to consult with somebody without starting all the mechanisms of law enforcement that you would if you had to rely on something like a patrol response, is where a lot of the work between the lines gets done. And where I think your analogy of the stool is perfect. I understand it. And I think maybe it's in my mind, it poses a different question as to clarity is, you know, I would imagine that the school district would love to have more counselors and things like that. It's always been my understanding that those kind of additional responsibilities around the school resource officers is to help build that resource officer into a more multi-dimensional element within the school. It's not for necessarily the lack of resources and they're filling a hole, but it's more making them a more complete component of the school environment.
Thank you, Chief. And we have a list of next people to speak. I did want to just back to your question, Anthony, also about the right to, I think one thing also that our partners at the city can do is, and I look at this as, I think maybe 3 months ago, we had a presentation, or maybe 2 months ago now. Time is really difficult to keep track of nowadays. But we had a presentation from our library, which is really great to see how they took, they looked at what our goals were of our strategic plan in our district, what we were trying to achieve in regards to our reading, and they created that program for a library card for our youth. And so I see that as a great example of a partnership with the city where they looked at what is it that the district needs and how can we serve them or help them, and then provided the right tool in that, you know, program area to do that. I think that the other thing, back to your feedback around the data, is that we know that there's a lot of data that talks about students participating in extracurricular activities and sports. And there's a lot of overlap in what services city provides that can also help our district. It's no secret that education in Oregon is not funded to keep with our current service level. So I just want to put that out to you all to kind of put your creative thinking caps on and see where are there areas that our students in our community really need support and help and resources that the city can provide in that space, whether it's scholarships to participate in activities that normally cost money, or just thinking about those ways that we can also look for the right tools to serve our students. And so with that, I'll hand it off to Jackie after, but I know Maya and Devlin are here. And for our student representatives, this is a pretty intimidating group of adults to be in here. And I just want to make sure that, as always, we are centering our conversation around what's best for our students and what our students' perspectives, that their voices, we are bringing them to the table. So I just want to, after Jackie's question, Maya and Devlin, I want to give you the opportunity to just provide any feedback or any opinions that you may have in this space. So go ahead, Jackie.
Chief Coleman, thank you for being here and answering our questions. One of the questions that comes to my mind is, what is your force doing to diversify your workforce?
Yeah, well, it's actually despite my fears several months ago about the ability to attract quality candidates to the police department, we've actually had an overwhelming number of candidates reach out to us, particularly officers with experience and officers from, we are in the middle of a hiring process, but it feels as though, because some of them haven't passed background and things like that, but it feels like our most diverse candidate pool perhaps ever at the police department. And that strikes across several categories. But as I've mentioned before to our council, any one of those candidates would stand out on their own, regardless of, they're not filling, specific roles. They'd stand out on their own as far as their career accomplishments. And, I always hesitate because I feel like I'm going to jinx myself, but our department has the kind of reputation right now that's attracting high quality candidates that want to work in a particular community and police department environment that suits suits why they got into police work. So we have in many ways the pick of the cream of the crop. And so I think the most, we certainly do traditional things. We reach out to college job fairs. We advertise in multiple languages. We're on national websites for recruitment. But what really has proven to be our best recruiting tool is our reputation, and the reputation of Hillsboro as a place to work and live. I know that sounds a little bit like a pitch, but you set it up for me. Thank you. And it really is one of the most joyful things about my job right now is to see who wants to come and work here. And we're usually pretty good about welcoming new folks into our police department and putting their pictures and a little bio on our community outreach efforts. So I'll leave it in some ways for people to kind of look at that and draw their own conclusions as to how well we're doing. But I do report numbers annually, so I'm feeling very hopeful this year.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Jackie and Chief. Let's go with Devlin and then Maya, if you have any comments.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question. As far as, I don't really have anything as far as questions on stuff that was brought up during the presentations. I do have some personal experience that I could bring up, if that's if that's all
Yes,
right.
this is your time. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, this is kind of scary if I'm being honest. So as I have some personal experience, or well, I have some things that I kind of would like to go over, just personal experience that, things that I've seen, things that I've heard with school resource officers, and some things that I would personally like to see school resource officers, like the kind of influence I want them to be for students in the Hillsboro School District. As far as things that I've seen, if I'm being completely honest, I haven't really had that much experience, and I need to explain this a little bit, but essentially I know for a fact that we do have a school resource officer at Liberty High School, but if I'm being completely honest, I haven't really seen that much. I haven't seen them do all that much, if I'm being honest. Generally, the most that I've seen is them standing out in the halls, and watching students pass by, make sure that, everything's in order there, but that's generally all that I see. And I think that school resource officers should kind of, if we were in health class, for example, if we're doing a drug prevention unit, I think that that would be a perfect place for somebody like a school resource officer to come in and be a good influence, talk about stuff like that, or, be a good influence for students who maybe don't have a safe adult to talk to. I think that's something that, personally, that's what I think that school resource officers should be, but that's something that I really haven't been seeing. But at the same time, I actually had the opportunity to sit in on a student group about SROs with Superintendent Mike. There was one student there, and he was talking about how, the school resource officer there had helped him and helped keep him out of trouble by, kind of scaring him straight, I guess. I don't really know exactly how he put it, but he said that the school resource officer was, in short, a very good influence on him, and it helped keep him out of trouble. And I feel like that's something, the quality of what exactly is going on is something that kind of varies in between school resource officers. And I just like to point out right now that I don't entirely know exactly what the school resource officer is doing at our high school. For all I know, they could be doing all sorts of really amazing things, and I just haven't been seeing it. But just from what I've seen, I haven't really seen all that much. And as far as what I would like school resource officers to be, I would like school resource officers to be at least a safe adult to talk to, because I have people like that in my life, and there are some people that don't have a safe adult to talk to that maybe isn't their parents. And I feel like that's something that, in general, it should be somebody that you can look up to, somebody that you can talk to, I guess. Just somebody that's a good influence. And I don't really know how to close this off, if I'm being honest, but those are just my thoughts and my experiences on school resource officers, I guess.
Thank you, Devlin.
That's great.
Maya?
I'm just going to be looking down because I wrote down some of my thoughts on my paper, but I think it is important for school to feel safe for every and all student, or for all and every, for every student. And I just appreciate the work the SROs have done, but we also need to have these conversations in order to ensure that all students feel safe at school. So I just appreciate that we are even having these conversations, because I think that, yeah, the idea of policing definitely has changed, and it needs to change in schools as well.
Thank you, Maya. Then we have Mark and Kyle.
Thanks for the time, everybody. I appreciate us going late and you guys sticking with us. I know you have work to do after this, so appreciate that. I'm looking forward to when, at the appropriate time, having your feedback from the MOU draft. That's what I'm really looking forward to. I want to hear sort of your perspective on that. And one of the things, I appreciate Chief Coleman sort of recognizing how the national dialogue is influencing the local conversations that we're having. And sort of with that in mind, it's been important to me throughout this process to ensure that as we're thinking as a district about how we want the SRO program to look, to make sure that that intersects with how you guys might be trying to re-envision 21st century policing. So I think there's a lot of transition and change happening. So one of the things I'm curious about is, you know, what your feedback to the annual review is going to be, because I would like to see us, you know, not have something so set in stone that's intractable and we can't change as your force evolves, as our needs evolve. I'd like to be able to continue to do that. Because I mean, you know, somebody's going to replace me on the school board someday, and hopefully we'll have a systemic structure in place that allows the collaborative work that we're doing now to continue. So that's I'm hopeful that, you know, as you guys re-envision what 21st century policing looks like to you, that we have a way to incorporate those changes that you're making in our school district. Any program that I would want to support would sort of have that. And so sort of with that systemic thing in mind, the sort of second point is that I hear frequently about these off-the-record conversations that administrators have with the SRO officers and how productive that is and how valuable that is. And I understand that, but I also have a little bit of a concern about one of the pillars of our systemic infrastructure being off-the-record conversations. And I don't know how to accommodate that. I'm just putting it out there as a concern I have. And thanks again for, you know, being willing to take the time to chat with us.
Thanks, Mark. Kyle?
Excellent, thank you. I guess the first thing I would say is just there's been some conversation about resources, and I think Chair Lopez, you know, brought up how schools are underfunded, and I think we should all acknowledge that they absolutely are. The structure of funding in Oregon, it comes from the state level, combination of income taxes and property taxes. It comes down to them, and it's simply not enough. And I would really encourage the district to go out for a levy to not only hire teachers, but also hire these other resources that are, you know, the community is showing that they need. For us, we did that. We went out, we did a local option levy for our school resource officers. They were highlighted in our levy, I think about 2 years ago it passed with 82% of the community supporting it. It was the highest number we ever got. So I think this community is ready to support that effort. And I think that really we need to organize and we need to move in that direction. One of the things that I think is really important when we talk about folks not being included enough in this conversation are the victims, right? The school resource officer, the O in that is officer, and they are doing actual police work. That's why they're coming from our police department. In the data that we have, this was sent to you, Councilor Martin, on June 29th. It shows over the last 2 years, more than 1,000 cases that our school resource officers worked on of the 20,000 kids that are enrolled in the Hillsboro School District. And often, and I'll take some responsibility for this, we don't talk about that work that they do, frankly, because it's not pretty, right? These are victims of child abuse, of child neglect. You know, 375 of those cases fit into that realm. The rest of the cases primarily were student-on-student sexual assault, serious physical fighting, often with weapons, and weapon threats against the school. This is work for police officers, okay? So they're there to serve that role, and we're not doing that work. They can do that work more effectively by building relationships with kids, right? That's why they're going and they're educating kids in the classroom. That's why they're there at the eating lunch with kids whenever they can. I was so excited to see that Morgan Quimby was here, because in your last meeting, she spoke about her experience as a teacher, I think it was at Glencoe, and every year the school resource officer would come in and they would teach a class on identifying, basically sexual assault and safe and appropriate relationships. And she said every single year after that, kids would come forward and they would identify themselves as being a victim to that school resource officer. And that school resource officer in some cases would go all the way and sit with that victim in court, okay? So these 1,000 kids that I'm talking about are very important. And I feel like they are also being underrepresented in this conversation. And I understand that we can't identify them, but there is an important police work on the other side of this. It's not just about mentoring and counseling. So I just thought it was really important that we make that point.
Thank you, Kyle. Chief, I don't know if you wanted to answer something before, and I might have seen you start.
Oh, I just want to make sure, trying to make sure that I answer any questions, and thank you, Erica, that might have been posed, and then any question in my mind that it was just, sometimes it's just a statement rather than a question. But yeah, we certainly are interested in the transparency mechanism and the accountability mechanism that the superintendent has mentioned, and I think it's it is important that, and some of the students mentioned too, Maya and Devin, that we can have hopes as to what will happen, but we also, need to trust and verify that we're in line with what the goals are of what we, and that the will of the groups that are charged with oversight of this is being met through the things that we put in place. I feel like to answer a question about are the things that we're doing related to policing in the last 6 months, how might they be reflected in how our school resource officers do their jobs? I really do think that, we will see that reflected. It may take time, but it's the type of person that gets into the police work and the type of person that wants to be a resource officer. These are people that have an attraction to education, and they want to be a positive influence. So I think we will see it there, and we just demand more police officers. I'd like to think we've done it here for quite a while, but the bar is just continually being raised, and we demand more of them. We demand what you might call the soft skills. We demand the deliberation before you just, there's a difference between can you make an arrest and should you make an arrest. And there's a lot of, I really appreciate what Councilor Martin said about victims. It's not only servicing victims, it's making sure that we make sure the victim has a voice in what they want to see transpire. Sometimes they're extremely forgiving, and if we have latitude in that arena, we can certainly accommodate it, and we want officers to think deliberatively that way. And other times, unfortunately, it's a much more serious circumstance. But hopefully I covered a few of the questions there.
Thank you, Chief. I do see a comment from Shian, and before I call on you, Shian, I also just wanted to acknowledge and thank all of you for just participating. I think one of the biggest challenges in why I think a lot of agencies struggle with making systemic changes is there really isn't even a conversation that starts. And I just want to acknowledge all of our directors, our counselors, and our staff that are here and having these very difficult conversations. And the fact that you're here and you're talking means that our community can benefit from the improvements that come out of these conversations. And it's going to be, and this is what I always tell my board members when we're doing a lot of this work in our board session is this work is really awkward, it's really messy, and if it isn't all of those things, then you're not doing it right. So expect to have that discomfort and expect to have these conversations. And so I just want to thank you all for being engaged and for participating and for ensuring that you're making sure that your thoughts and concerns are being heard. So Sheehan, I'm going to call on you.
Thank you, Chair Lopez and Mayor Callaway. So I have a couple comments and then a question at the very end. I want to start by saying I think that this is just an opportune time. I think it took a very unfortunate event like the murder of George Floyd for us to spark these conversations to happen at a larger scale. But I think that it's very needed, especially considering I know that in Hillsboro, we used to have a policy around what SROs did, but I know that in the most recent years has kind of gone away. And so in terms of what the purpose of the SRO program has really been a giant question mark. And I think that in some of the survey responses that we got, that was seen from administrators, from parents, from teachers, where it was a little bit unclear as to what an SRO does and what the presence of an SRO means. And so I think that for us to provide a little bit of clarity around, do we still want an SRO program? And if so, what are the primary functions that we see, especially in serving our students and our marginalized students? And so I think that I agree with what Chair Lopez has said about us needing this partnership and us having these dialogues at a much larger scale. And so I appreciate just the intentionality that I think our district has been taking, as well as the city at large and the county. The question that I have is, I'm not sure if this would be for Chief Coleman or for Morgan, but it's around the selection of SRO officers and who would serve as an SRO in our school district. The way I understand it is that there are police officers that identify whether or not they want to be a part of an SRO program, and they go through kind of a selection process, and there's a kind of a matchmaking process as to who gets to serve as an SRO in schools. Is there any way that district personnel would be able to sit on that selection committee or be involved in the process of which SROs actually get to be placed in certain schools?
Yeah, I can start if Morgan wants to catch anything that, maybe they're working on in the MOU or something I might miss. We do involve the school district personnel currently in our selection process. As a matter of fact, our most recent one, we selected the new sergeant for the program, and 2 members of HSD were there as part of that selection process. So we find it valuable. They certainly know what the more well-rounded candidate looks like and ticks off some of those skills, because we always are going to have our own biases as to how we view that officer and what their performance has been here. And frankly, I think we need that blind spot filled into maybe somebody who, frankly, sometimes people who aren't the greatest patrol officers are fantastic school resource officers, and vice versa. So that is currently how we do it. I think one of the more exciting ideas that I have heard discussed, and perhaps Morgan can fill more in on this, is having student involvement at some degree. So yeah, these are positions that get paid a specialty pay because they have a higher level of training and expertise and that. So there are mechanisms, as I mentioned before, that would have to be satisfied on a fairness level and a labor level here. But I think we're in that arena, and we'd like to even expand it, I think is what my message would be.
Thank you.
And thank you for asking that question, because that is something that's come up in a variety of conversations with families too, is that transparency and that involvement, so that there's understanding of what the hiring process and that selection process is, and then having a voice from a staff member or students if that's a possibility. So I know there's labor stuff to be mindful of, but that transparency of what the hiring process is, and then having a voice in who's selected to be at the school that I go to or that I am a part of. And so we would like to formalize that in the MOU if that's possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Chief. I don't see any other hands up, Mayor.
I see Councilor Alcare.
Oh, there you
go. Here's what I'd like to say about the collaboration that we have and whatever decisions that we make. Is I am, I'm glad those students came to the plaza. I'm glad that they said what they had to say, because if they hadn't have said that, this wouldn't be happening and we wouldn't be talking about the change. So what they experienced in the school district and what they experienced in the city were similar. I would like, whatever we come up with, that we can turn that around so that there's a positive experience for them in school, so that there's a positive experience out in the city where they're not going to be targeted or treated, profiled, or any of those things. I'm just saying that that's what my hope is from this. I'm not saying that that's what is happening, but I'm saying that's what my hope is, what's going to happen, because I felt bad for those students that came and that they had these experiences growing up from, you know, the time that they started early grade school all the way through high school. And then to hear one come back and say, I love Hillsboro. I want to be here and I want to continue to giving back to my community despite the experiences. So this is what my hope is in the collaboration. I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivia.
Assistant Superintendent Ryman.
Thank you. Sorry, there's one part of the conversation that didn't come up, and I'll be regretting it if it doesn't. I try to think about if I were visiting our community and addressing the concept of policing with students. We have 1,000 kids in our district who identify as Black or African American or African or multiracial and Black, and it's a smaller portion of our community than other demographic groups. But if you were from another community, you'd be right to ask, how could you move forward with this plan without the support of your Black community? And we were real deliberate about engaging that conversation. And I want to tell you, I can't speak on behalf of our Black community, but I was part of 3 meetings that I thought were important. The first was our Black Village Family Advisory Committee, when Sergeant O came and talked about our survey and encouraged parents to fill out the survey and engage in that process. Also talked about the question of SROs in our community, and then came back a month later with Morgan Quimby and shared data from that survey. And we're transparent about the disaggregated data by race in the survey, and then shared the ideas that were coming together for the MOU, and had a dialogue about that with each other, took notes, and then they came to a board meeting and talked to our school board face-to-face about their recommendations as they showed up in that MOU, and talked about their general support for the MOU, despite experiences that members of the Black and African American community have had that have been negative regarding policing in real life. I just want to throw that out there because I would hate for those voices to not show up here tonight, and for anybody to be asked, how are you engaging your African American community, and not have an answer to that. I don't think our engagement ends now, and I would encourage the group to talk about how to engage with our Black community on into the future. I'm happy to support that. Thanks for the conversation tonight.
And
I had one more comment, if that's okay, Mayor.
perfect. And then we'll go to Ms. Spitzer.
Just in regards to you know, we've talked heavily about the SRO program. That makes complete and total sense. But one of the things I would ask that we do as a city is try and do some amount of an alternatives analysis, looking at what other ways we can provide these services and whether or not this is as school resource officers are the best method. So that's something that I would like to see from I know I'm one of many, so I'm not demanding it, but it's something I'd like to see on the side of the city. So, thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Spitzer.
Hi there, Dale Spitzer, Assistant Superintendent of Schools. I appreciated Travis's comment about working with our families of students who identify as Black, African American, and I just am really thankful for the layers of information and feedback that we have received. And I know, Ms. Auclair, you had talked about student voices and just hearing those, and we were really challenged in our first survey. It was in the summer and we didn't get very many students, and Devlin really challenged us to go and get more student voices. And I think it's just really important that we continue to lean on the experiences of our kids. And we have had many students say, I haven't had a good experience with police, or I'm not represented by the police. And we heard parents say that too. They were definitely grieving the loss of the involvement of Officer Castro after he left. And I'm excited to hear about the work to diversify our workforce that supports our schools in the SRO role. But I think like we have a lot of really good information, and I believe that if the board so chooses and we're able to create an MOU with some clarity, that has been the overarching voice of everyone. We need to be really clear on what SROs do, what they're expected to do at all layers. Everybody needs to be really, really clear and what they can expect. And I know from the beginning, Erica Lopez has asked us through the board, whatever we decide to do, let's revisit it in a year. And I think I see that over and over, the need to do that. And I'm just really thankful for the conversation and for everybody bringing their perspectives, because as Kyle had shared, we do have students who have some needs. Unfortunately, we do have issues of abuse and other issues that those relationships really matter. And even in this time of COVID, we've had students reach out to principals saying, how do I get a hold of the SRO? I need a resource. I need to talk to people that can support me. And so it's not perfect, but I think it takes our whole community. And I'm just really thankful for the multiple layers of conversation that we're having here in Hillsboro as we make good choices for supporting our community and our students and our schools.
Thank you. You know, I recognize that my experience with SROs are very unique to my role as a principal and also as a white male. And, you know, Olivia, as you talked about the youth in the plaza, and that was a very eye-opening thing for me to hear, because clearly their experiences were very different than mine. And you know, I can give story after story, example after example of how really SROs made a critical difference in the culture, positive difference in the culture of a school, in a student's life, in supporting you know, families and teachers. But you know, what I've heard is that there is room for improvement, room for growth. And Erica, you mentioned that you own that, and we do too. We own it together. And so this has been a wonderful conversation and a wonderful work session tonight. And I would say enhanced because Maya and Devlin, your participation as well. So I look forward to seeing what the MOU looks like. And I thank you, Chief and Lieutenant, for being here tonight to hear, you know, what we had to say. I am proud of our city. I'm proud of our school district, and I'm proud, you know, of our efforts and our work together. And I'm looking forward to the product that will be coming from this.
Thank you, Mayor. I also just wanted to acknowledge that, as Travis said, we've been doing some more intentional outreach with our Black community members, and understanding that though that the numbers and the demographic is small, there is a huge need on, I think, Kyle, if you've been, as you said, listening to our sessions, you know, one of the things that really resonated with me in hearing from our community members was that because their numbers are so small, they're kind of scattered throughout our whole district. And one opportunity that came from having that meeting is that for many of our families and their kids, it was the first time that they've ever played with, that their kids have ever played with somebody from the same ethnic background, because they didn't even have that community or space in our community, in our city, to have those interactions. So that's just something that I wanted to point out. As we serve the same families, the same students, that we look for opportunities where we can really impact their lives. And I tend to think about this even within our city. Sometimes when we talk about race and when we talk about racism and how do we lessen the impacts of systemic racism, it seems so daunting and so big that it's hard to wrap our minds around what we can do as an institution. And something that I like to, like Anthony said, an analogy that I like to think about is to look at what we have all done, especially here in Oregon, when we think about sustainability. We're not really arguing about, you know, what one particular person believes around like climate change, but we said that we wanted to lessen our impact and lessen our footprint. And so we specifically put in measures or build in accountability, and we measure that and account for that and have programs around that. So if we take the same concept and look at the impact that we have in our communities of color, whether it's economic opportunities, education opportunities, that we look at the impact and the disparities that exist, and that we measure that, and that we hold it up to the programs that we have in place or the opportunities that we create in our communities. That's something that we can measure and we can see. And that's something that both of us in our city and in our school district have the opportunity to impact those same families in different ways. So I just want to thank you all for participating in this conversation. And this isn't the end of the conversation. This is just the beginning of the conversation. There's definitely a lot of room for improvements on our side for our district that we continue to make, and that we hope to continue this dialogue. So thank you again for everyone for attending our work session, and to our staff, both at the city and the district, for putting this on.